It's May 11th. It's a very rainy day, and I just got back from exercising at the YMCA. I'm still kind of reeling from some of these extreme vibrations, and I'm going to set aside a couple hours after I'm done making this video to do a little bit more research looking into these things. I haven't paid them much attention for a while. A number of years ago, I was looking into frequencies a lot and being attacked energetically and stuff like that, and I just gave it up after a while. I did the best I could to protect myself, and I've tried to just stay focused on as much creative stuff as possible and not let myself get too dragged into anything dark. And for the most part, when I'm talking about toes on the ground, I'm talking about the dark stuff, the stuff that we don't want to look at because it's ugly, it makes us feel uncomfortable. And so my intention in communicating is not to communicate any more dark stuff than is necessary. To make sure you get it is absolutely essential, that you got your toes firmly planted in the ground, yet you got your fingers in the sky and that you're focusing on the vision that you want to create. And you're using most of your energy to create what you want to create and using very, very little to focus on the darkness. Now, there are times like the last several days where the intensity that I've been feeling has been so extreme that I felt like I needed some kind of solution. I needed something to deal with it. So obviously going to the YMCA and doing some exercise and getting engaged in a game is helpful. Using the sauna, showering, all that kind of stuff to kind of clean yourself off can be helpful. There's this one really elderly guy that sometimes he shows up around when I do, and his locker was like right near mine today, and he brings this old Right Guard spray deodorant or whatever it is, and he just stinks up the whole frickin' locker room. It's so disgusting. So I got to my locker right after the shower, and he was right there, and it's like, oh, Jesus Christ. And I got to go back and go in the sauna for a little bit longer and shower just so I don't have to be around that kind of crap. It's ridiculous kind of stuff. I mean, who uses that shit anymore? It's just a relic. I mean, this man is just a living relic of a age long gone. So using the tools that we need to manage this reality the best we can is obviously important. It's something that we're probably inevitably going to do to a certain degree anyhow without being told to do it. But if we're in a condition in which 1 in 3 people is getting cancer, I think it's 1 in 50 boys is getting the diagnosis of autism now. If 10% of the world lives with chronic pain, and most of these numbers are going up and up and up, so the last time I heard of these statistics, it's probably only gotten worse since I've last heard about them, because things are only getting worse. So we see that the direction that we're going down is a bad one, that it's horrible. There's a lot of great solutions, a lot of great little minor solutions, what I call them, in the directions of health and sustainability, and we have some incredible technologies, and we have some incredible methods of solving problems, which were, if they were implemented on a larger scale, we'd be all benefiting from them dramatically. So we have technology that exists right now, which would, if it were being distributed and made accessible to everyone, we'd be much more better off than we are now. So that's part of the problem, is distribution. When we talk about food, that's the same thing. Distribution of food is really the problem. I mean, there's no shortage of food in this world. I'm sure that we throw way more food away than it would take to feed all the people who are malnourished in this world. Obviously, we have a lot of fat people in the first world, and we have people starving and really skinny in the third world. And so distribution is really the problem. Overpopulation is a gimmick. It's not a real issue that we have in this world. We don't have a overpopulation problem whatsoever. We're not even close to the world's capacity of how many people it could hold if it were a truly healthy planet. If we didn't have these vast deserts, if we didn't have continents that were covered with ice. You know, if the temperature was more regulated, it could support way more people. If there was a much more healthy atmosphere and a healthy environment, it could sustain a population probably 3 times the size easily. So overpopulation is a gimmick. It's not a real issue. I don't hear people talking about overpopulation as much anymore, and that's probably because that was back in, you know, prior to 2012, when the population reduction efforts were stronger than they are now. Now what they're doing is they're pretty much, when I say they, I'm talking about the scumbags, is they're pretty much just throwing anything they can at this just to delay their demise. And understand, I'm narrating a story here, and I don't know 100% what the big picture is. My job is to make music and to offer the plan, because the plan is like the ground level action plan that we as people, as human beings, can do. And the grand plan is the plan according to the eyes of God, or according to the eyes of heaven. Let's go ahead and define God real quick too, since I just used that word. God is, in truth, synonymous with heaven. They're one and the same thing, but if we really want to use the word God and make it distinct from heaven, which is a helpful distinction to do, we should understand God to be the perfect parent, the personification of the perfect parent, because that's normally how we relate to God. Because we are in these minds which cannot imagine, which cannot really step out of the whole body-mind complex that we're in. We're kind of stuck with the way we see things. Obviously, that can change over time to a certain degree, but basically we're stuck with this identity that we have here. And we can know that we're operating through a false identity, but we're operating through this identity. So God is just simply a helpful way for us to relate to heaven. So we have, in most religions, we have personal depictions of God, which mean quite literally that God is a person in certain religions. And that's not wrong to do that. It's just a tool that we can use to relate to heaven. Because how can we even imagine everything, all that is, in its vast, infinite perfection? That's something our minds can't really grasp too well. But God is something that we can imagine in the form of a human being, someone that was like a go-between between where we are and heaven, someone in the middle, kind of like a medium. So that's the way we use the word God for the most part. God is just our interpretation, our subjective interpretation of the personification of the perfect heavenly parent. And that's pretty much what God is to us. Because if you were to ask most people, well, who is God, would they be able to even define it? And I'm really against using terminology that does not have a proper definition. So if I'm going to use the word God, I'm going to define what God actually means. And I do differentiate it between heaven a little bit, because I like to keep that distinction because it's an important one. Because sometimes I might use the word God, like God does not care if you smoke and fart or something, or whatever it is. That's putting a personification onto God. It's amazing how those commercials kind of can screw me up. So I got this spray here. It's got some essential oils in it, and I'm just doing my best to make sense of these videos. I really don't have the energy these days to create anything that's really well organized, unfortunately. I'd like to have more organized talks, but I just hope that I can barf out everything that needs to come out in the next several weeks or whatever. I'm getting completely slammed right now, as many of us are. I mentioned that we're getting hit with basically everything the scumbags have at this point in time, just to continue the feeding frenzy for a little bit longer. And so they're using some of these really advanced kind of technologies in the form of frequencies to mess with us. And whether these frequencies are targeted at individuals or people just have higher sensitivities, We don't know that yet. In terms of pathogens, I stated a while ago that I thought in pretty much all cases of sickness, you'd find pathogens in the body too. But it might not be, the sickness itself might not be attributable to the pathogens in many cases. It might be more of a frequency phenomenon, or it could be them operating in sync with one another. With regards to the Lyme spirochetes, that's like the little corkscrew kind of worm that the Lyme disease is. They actually have communication with other microorganisms in your body, and they can actually sort of coordinate a strategy to defeat your immune system. And it's really important to think about things like this, and to really observe nature, and to really observe what's going on in nature. I'm really fond of looking at especially communal systems in nature and seeing how they relate to one another and how they function. Like in particular, ant colonies and beehives, bee colonies are really good demonstrations of the intelligence and how intelligence works together and how they cooperate, and how beings that might not really know what they're doing are still contributing to a system. They might not be conscious of what they're doing, but they are a key player in the system. Because it's a really important thing to think about, because you'll begin to understand when you look at that more and more how most people are just simply following a program. They're being controlled, and they don't understand how they're being manipulated and controlled. They don't see that exactly, and I don't see exactly how that operates on an individual level too well either. But when we look at analogies in nature, then we can understand better and better, well, how does the human body even function? Obviously, there's an intelligence that keeps the heart beating. There's an intelligence that keeps everything in the biological system running. Even in your own body, there's just like a universe of intelligence that's going on. Obviously, the programs and the intelligence that are operating in the human body are not for your own good, because you're in a nightmare where everything breaks down, including your own body. And unfortunately, the breakdown of the human body entails an enormous amount of discomfort and pain. I was talking with a few people this morning. One woman in her upper 50s was saying there's nothing good about aging, nothing. And then she said that she's got all this wisdom and nobody would even listen to her, and kind of relate to it. She's a pretty cool person, actually. And I hope that I'm perceived as a sane being. I realize that I get pushed sometimes to levels of stress where I gotta let it out, because it's just overwhelming. And I care so much about people, and I'm just so concerned about their well-being, and it's very painful to think about the direction that we're moving in and what's going to happen to the people I love if we don't shift directions here.